Today on the Green Left Show, we have an interview with Victorian Socialists Senate candidate Jordan van den Lam, also known as Purple Pingers. Before we get underway, I wanted to acknowledge this show has been recorded on stolen First Nations land. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Also, if you like the work that we do, please do become a Green Left supporter if you're not already. It's the number one way to support the work that we do and also to receive the content that we produce. Now, this interview was conducted by Chloe from Naarm, Melbourne, and she began by asking Jordan to talk about how we got involved in advocating and campaigning for the rights of renters and unhoused people.
Yeah, I was just kind of incensed by the injustice that I saw, and seeing it increased made me want to do something about it. I started out by, uh, you know, just kind of the place that I worked in child sex abuse at the time, and it was during COVID, and I wanted to, talk about the injustices that I was seeing at my work, but I obviously couldn't. So the next kind of closest thing was renting. So that's what started it.
How can the housing crisis actually be solved? And how much do the solutions challenge capitalism in general?
Yeah, well, the problem is there are so many. Well, or the good thing is actually that there are so many ways that we can solve the housing crisis. We've had hundreds of Senate inquiries, parliamentary inquiries into the housing crisis, and recommendations, like thousands of recommendations that all say the same thing, over years and years and years. And it's actually relatively easy from a political perspective. But we know that, like, as a socialist, we know that that's not going to happen. Like, they're not just going to do that for us. The ruling class will never just be like, oh, the working class is suffering a bit. Maybe we'll just be a bit nicer to them. I think the problem with that is, yes, it's really easy for the ruling class to do this. They're not going to do this. But there are also heaps of policy solutions that we can talk to, like massively improving public housing, massively building public housing, rent cuts, rent freezes backdated to 2021 levels when rent was relatively more affordable, even though it was still quite unaffordable. Minimum rental standards that are enforced and set by renters across the country, and, auditing empty homes, establishing a national bank to provide home loans without a profit incentive for first home buyers, all that kind of stuff. We can do all of that, and it's really simple, but we won't do that. So the actual solution needs to come from people, from the working class, and there are heaps of things that we can do there. For example, rent strikes, squatting, occupations, things like that. That would really put pressure on particularly like the literal ruling and owning class. They wouldn't be able to pay off their mortgages that we're currently paying off at the moment. That would put mad stress on, the housing market. It would require banks to foreclose on those properties, which would massively crash the price of housing if it happened en masse around the country. There's heaps of things that we can do that don't require the ruling class to be nice to us. We can threaten them, but whether or not we're at that stage yet is up for debate.
How do the major party policies fall short, including maybe comment on some of the racism that's come out against migrants and refugees?
Yeah, well, firstly on the migrants and refugees point, all the studies, all of the data shows that is not the cause of our housing crisis. The cause of our housing crisis is the ruling class failing to provide public housing for Australian citizens, refugees, and migrants. That's the cause. That's the cause of the housing crisis. So to blame it on migrants, when if you look at the data, housing supply has increased far greater than the rate of population increase in this country, is just like ridiculous. It's a cop out, and what it does when the Labor Party kind of leans into that argument, it seeds the ground for the Liberal Party and then the further right parties to just outwardly be racist, which is really disappointing. And then we can see, in like the major parties think that, the problem is supply. That's their argument. The problem is supply, when that's just not the case. We have a distribution issue, not a supply issue. Yes, we do need to build more homes. Yes, we do need to build more public housing. But at the moment in Victoria, what we've seen is there were, at the last census, 30,000 people experiencing homelessness in the entire state, which is a disgusting amount. But in metropolitan Melbourne alone, excluding places like the Mornington Peninsula, which are technically metropolitan Melbourne, but have an overwhelming amount of like holiday homes, there were 97,000 empty homes in metropolitan Melbourne. So we have a distribution issue. There are more than enough houses for everyone. They're just being land banked by, the owning class and developers and stuff like that. So yeah, let's distribute homes equally, and then also build public housing. Instead of doing stuff like that, the ruling class is making policies, massive policy announcements that do literally nothing for renters, and then for home ownership will increase the cost of housing in this country. That's all they're doing, like demand subsidy. Not helpful at all.
Can you address some of the scaremongering about squatting?
Yeah, it's just silly, I guess. Like, if you don't want someone to squat in your empty house, don't have an empty house. It's pretty simple. Like, I don't know how else you're meant to be convinced of that, but just don't leave a house empty and you'll be fine. You'll be totally fine. Like, the thing is, like, people who are experiencing homelessness in your community are your neighbors, and you should care about them. And if you don't, there's not really anything that I can do to convince you that you should care about them. But the thing is, like, if a squatter moves into an empty house next to you, they're your neighbor too, just like they were if they were sleeping rough, and you should care about them regardless of, whether they have a roof over their head or not. And also, the person leaving the empty house next to you is also your neighbor, and you should be really pissed at them.
What could be achieved by having a socialist voice in Parliament?
So much. I think we're kind of, like, we saw a little example of it when Albanese called me a disgrace. It's like having a socialist voice in Parliament would just completely reject any of the current status quo that we have currently. People are disillusioned and disaffected by politics at the moment. And what that means is people move away from, the major party perspectives and start looking to the fringes, because it's like, oh, maybe that'll represent us, and then end up going to people like Pauline Hanson, who just use your disillusionment and fuel racism and stuff like that. And it's really infuriating. But having a socialist voice in Parliament would allow us to build class struggle, like, amplify class struggle, use like the things that we get from being in Parliament, the even if it's like notoriety or whatever, or the literal office that we get if we're elected, we can use that to build class struggle, amplify class struggle, and support it. And take some of that exorbitant salary and use it to put into a strike fund or community organizing and things like that. There's so much stuff that we could do outside of Parliament if we had a voice in Parliament. We don't at the moment. And like, we saw examples of that even in this country, like with Fred Patterson, who's probably not the best example because he's a Stalinist. But the things that he did, like literally using his office, like shouting at the ruling class, like hurling our accusations at literally the oppressors sitting directly in front of him. That's what we'd do.
Thanks for joining us at Green Left, Jordan. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you would like to say?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say it's been such a privilege being able to support people like Sue and Sarah in this election. And I hope we get to do stuff like that in the future because I think it's really important. And it's just been great.
Thank you for your time, Jordan.
Thanks for having me.
That brings us to the end of the Green F Show. Thanks, Chloe, for conducting the interview. Thanks, Jordan, for your time. And thank you for joining us today. As I said at the beginning, if you do like the work that we do, please do become a Green F supporter if you're not already. It is the number one way to support our work and to receive the content that we produce. But even without spending a cent, remember you can help us out by simply giving this video or podcast a thumbs up, share it with your friends and networks, help us to build the audience for the Green F Show, and we will see you next time on the Green F Show.